Well, I'm Joe McNamara. I represent the 8th District, which is part of Roanoke County, part of Montgomery County, all of Craig County, and all of Salem City. I'm newly elected into the House of Delegates, elected last fall, and looking forward to another session coming up. There's a 140-member body, 40 in the Senate, 100 in the House of Delegates, and I am the only CPA, so that's kind of exciting from my perspective, and I think it's kind of exciting that we have that CPA trained voice looking at our budget cycle. Well, I would say, the whole concept of being a CPA in the public arena, when you look at the Commonwealth of Virginia, it's roughly $21 billion general fund. The total budget's about 3 times that. So you have 140 legislators, and of those 140 legislators, there's one that's a CPA. And so I think it definitely is, it certainly doesn't hurt the General Assembly. And I think it brings a very critical analysis from a budgeting perspective, which even when I was on elected office in the local level, that was always where I kind of spent most of my time. What I really enjoyed was the whole budgeting process and tax policy and trying to make good sense and use of tax policy. At the local level, you're somewhat limited, but at the state level, you have more capabilities and there's more things you can do to try to influence and change the lives of Virginians. So it's very exciting from that perspective. I would also say the General Assembly is extremely hierarchical in its design. I went in mid-session. I was actually number 98 out of 100, and you do not get, you don't have the clout, if you will, in the General Assembly at number 98 than you would at perhaps number 50 or number 15. And so this session was a real interesting session from the perspective we had the Jobs Act on the federal level, the tax changes and Jobs Act on the federal level, which impacted the revenues at the state level pretty significantly. So we had an opportunity to really look at our tax policy and what changes we were going to make. So even though I was number 98, I certainly had some more influence in creating policy, a significant policy, in my opinion, one of the most significant policies to come out of the General Assembly this year, just as a result of having the CPA credentials and the credibility that brings to the table. So from that perspective, it was very, very exciting. The very first day of the General Assembly, I did put a tax bill in. The tax bill, it was not only a tax bill, but it was also a conformity bill. It advanced the conformity up to our tax code to December 31st, 2018, but it also went a step further and it conformed the Virginia tax code to the federal tax code in areas where it was previously non-conforming. Areas like net operating loss carrybacks and the accelerated depreciation. So it was a very easy to understand bill, very simple to explain, and I thought it provided roughly a revenue neutral environment for the Commonwealth of Virginia. There were also a number of other bills. There was about 6 or 7 bills on the House of Delegates that were put in for consideration for this General Assembly. Very early in the process, there was a meeting called by leadership of all the delegates that had submitted a tax bill. Being a submitter of a tax bill, I was part of that meeting. And there was a tax bill I presented. There was a couple tax bills from some tax foundations that were carried by other delegates. And there was a tax bill from Delegate Tim Hugo, House Bill 2529. We met and we kind of talked about the differences in those bills. The House Bill 2529, Tim Hugo's tax bill, had a slight increase in the standard deduction. It increased it by 33%. The single went from $3,000 to $4,000, and the joint went from $6,000 to $8,000. It also decoupled the itemization from the federal return. So whether somebody itemized at the federal return was not a determining factor that they had to itemize at the state level return. It removed the $10,000 cap on state and local real estate and personal property taxes. It also, I think, removed, it decoupled from the state as far as the mortgage interest deduction. I think it went back to the $1 million. I'm not positive about that, but and it also allowed for some of the disallowed deductions at the federal level from global low tax income, and allowed that to be deducted on the state return. When we met and discussed the various different tax proposals, I did have some concerns with House Bill 2529. Most specifically was the decoupling of the itemization at the state level. I thought that the Commonwealth was biting off more than maybe we should chew. It would certainly require us to hire additional people. We now would no longer be able to utilize the auditing power and capabilities of the federal government, but in fact, have to create our own itemization, or excuse me, our own auditing department within the Commonwealth of Virginia. Did not seem very efficient, did not seem very efficient to the tax preparers, did not seem very efficient to the taxpayers in general. I also was a bit concerned that there was no limitation, because the piece limitation went away at the federal level, but the federal level, they did put some caps on the itemization deductions. And so with removing those caps on the deductibility on your Schedule A's without a piece limitation, I thought was concerning, and was a pretty significant change in the tax code that I didn't know that we really should be going down. We should be progressing on. Now, I will say the result of that meeting was a determination by leadership, and that the House Bill 2529 was going to be the preferred choice from the House of Delegates moving forward. So as the process evolved, and it's kind of really interesting as those processes evolve, the Senate has to come up with their bill as well. And so the Senate came up with a bill that was actually quite a bit closer to the bill that I originally had put in. The Senate bill, which was ultimately what ended up being House Bill 2529. House Bill 2529 was augmented and changed pretty significantly throughout that process. But the final bill that ended up passing through the General Assembly, on the delegate side, it was matched by an equivalent bill at the Senate side, did conform to the federal tax law going forward, beginning in tax year 2019, but it had a 50% increase in standard deduction, which was a little lower than what I was looking for. But still, the standard deduction hasn't been changed since 1989 at the single level, and I think 2004, 2005 at the joint level. So the timing is there. It makes sense. It does remove the cap on some state and local taxes, but at the very end of the negotiating process, the piece limitation, we deconform from the federal tax code by reinstituting the piece limitation at the state level. So the fact that that was put into the bill, it coupled with the removing the limitation or the cap on state and local taxes, made me feel a whole lot better with the way that bill was designed. It did keep some of the areas of nonconformity that currently exist, but that can be a topic as we go forward to this coming year. It does allowed some of the deductibility for the GILTI taxes, the global income from low tax areas, which it's a fairly small portion revenue impact on the bill. So, but it wasn't something that would have been my first choice, and it did for the first time, at first discussion area within the General Assembly, it did also look at some of the disallowed business interest income and the deductibility of that to some extent. I think 20% of it was being allowed at the state return. So it had some business-friendly provisions, but it also had some individual taxpayer provisions that were very friendly. Overall, I think it was a good bill, and I was happy to be a part of that. It's real exciting as we go into this coming General Assembly, because there's still some room for some additional tax policy changes. what a lot of the work I hope to do this fall is working with the major stakeholders and trying to understand where we can make the tax code more efficient, not only for the individuals paying the taxes, but for the preparers, from the collectors, and better structure our remove some of the all the different exceptions and small little tax code bills that make us less than as efficient as we could be. I think there's probably 80 to 120 million dollars available to still do some work with tax policy before you start impacting overall revenue streams, which that is a consideration as well. That's really the goal as we go forward with this fall, is try to take some of the expertise. Well, this is certainly not on the level of the many of the people that might be watching this that are active in the tax preparation business, which I am not. Certainly the expertise is somewhat different than the majority of the members of the General Assembly. So I think there's really an opportunity to try to look at what we can do from a change perspective and try to build up support to make our tax code more efficient going forward. I think there's about 20 states that do rolling conformity currently. So there will be a rolling conformity bill that I will sponsor in the General Assembly this fall. I think it makes great sense. You can take the rolling conformity and you can then tweak from the rolling conformity if that's the desire of the General Assembly. That seems to make more sense to take the lion's share conforming and tweak, as opposed to start from bare piece of paper, white paper, and then try to create a conformity year after year, which we did this year. So yes, thank you. That will be part of the legislative program this year. I think it's very interesting. The CPA members that come through the General Assembly and do the lobbying, both from the Virginia Society of CPAs as well as the practitioners, are a very, very well-respected group among the legislators. So I think there is a really, there is a very strong feeling that there's a lot of competence, that there are people that are looking to make to make our Commonwealth greater and more efficient and effective. And so I think just being involved, touching base with your legislators, making sure they realize, when we were going through the whole tax conformity issue this year, there is not a, there's less than 100% understanding of the impact of not conforming early does to the people in does to really all the taxpayers in Virginia. So there's certainly those that understand that very clearly, but there's probably many more that do not understand the real significance of it. So making sure people are aware, they know, but being involved is clearly the biggest thing. And the other thing is reach out to legislators when you see things that you come across on a daily basis that just don't make sense, and give us a chance to try to look at it and see if we can't make some changes. From a CPA perspective, you also have a great opportunity to look at long-range planning. So when you look at what is our rainy day funds, what are our cushions, there's really very nice, easy, simple ways to try to build up those cushions on an incremental basis. And the CPA mindset and the thought process is that exact thought process that can think through it, kind of lay out and make it very understandable. We're at A, how do we get to B or C? And do that in an incremental long-term solution basis. So I think that's not really tax policy, but it's almost saving policy, if you will. And I think we bring a unique set of skill set in that regard to the table. When we're going to actually really sit down and try to understand all the different exceptions within the tax code, and then all the different little tiny tax changes that could impact the state and local. So I think you saw in this General Assembly session a bill passed to allow an incremental sales tax by voter approval for Halifax County. And I think you're going to see a lot of counties coming back and cities coming back next year to try to put that incremental sales tax on. if you're going to put that incremental sales tax on and you're giving localities an additional tool to collect revenue, are you going to keep all the other tools they have to collect revenue, or are you going to try to make things more efficient? And business license tax is one that I think is just an inherently unfair tax the way it's designed and created at the local level. So is there opportunities from a state level that we can keep localities revenue neutral, but remove a tax that is just ill-conceived and really doesn't pass the muster when you look at what the pillars of good tax policy would have. The litter tax is a great example. It's every single business hits the litter tax. It's $10 or $25. It's not even on a bill. It has to be paid online. So people forget. The big businesses have staff to take care of. The small businesses, they forget. And so now their $10 or $25 litter tax is $50 litter tax. And so little areas like that, these little tiny things that have crept into our code over time we have a great opportunity right now to really look at some of those things and see how we might be able to change our code from and policy perspective going forward. One of the things that is, I think, real important for CPAs and people that have real interest in government is making sure that they understand who the candidates are in the primary, if they have a primary. And oftentimes those primaries are, for all intents and purposes, the general election. Even in the general election, I know the CPA group as a whole is a very good voting group, but how can they get involved perhaps a little bit more from helping the candidate of their choice, whether it be knocking some doors, maybe some financial contribution, calling friends, and otherwise making sure that the people that we're putting in these offices that are making these decisions that impact all of our lives are the right people, or the best people that we could possibly put in these offices. I had a pretty good idea, quite frankly, of what the General Assembly was going to be like, because I've been going to it for a lot of years and being involved at the local level. But one thing that was quite interesting or surprising to me, I guess I would say, is there is a lot more working across the aisle than I expected. The news media there's certainly the areas that there's pretty strong disagreements between Republicans and Democrats. But the news media will certainly concentrate on those disagreements and with most of their reporting. So it was quite surprising, interesting from a pleasant perspective, how well really all the members of the General Assembly do work together. We do have a couple of the big hot buttons, but for the most part, there's an awful lot of working together across the aisle. And at the end of the day, Virginia is an effective. We adopted a budget. We were a day late, which isn't bad. But we got to where we needed to go, and there was a lot of extra noise, if you will, coming out of the executive offices this session. But people were able to kind of put that behind them in the back of their head and go about doing their business. So from that perspective, I was very pleased and really enjoyed being part of that group.